Welcome into BSR post-game live for another great Orioles game or something. I'm Jake English from Bird's Eye View, speaking for Baltimore Sports Report, and with me, also a sister wife of the Baltimore Sports Report Network, Sam Dingman of the fabulous Baltimoreans podcast. Sam, thanks for being here.
Very glad to be here. Which great Orioles game were you watching?
I was watching a replay of any game that wasn't this.
Interesting, because I think I just watched a time machine game from 2010. That couldn't possibly have been my 2015 Orioles, my Buck Showalter Orioles, that just did that to my eyes.
I'm hoping actually it's not the case. I'm hoping that this isn't the 2015 Orioles, but I don't know if you watch these post-game shows, and I'm guessing nobody does, but I feel like I say that a lot on this very program.
Maybe the key is that we just shouldn't do post-game shows because they clearly seem to only follow absolute massacres.
You may be onto something. I think more importantly than not doing the shows in hopes that it will spur the Orioles onto victory, maybe we should not do these shows so that I don't have to stew in my own feelings after the game is over, because I'm sure that makes for very entertaining viewing.
What is independent sports podcasting if not stewing in one's own feelings?
Yeah, but they don't have to be these feelings. These are not the feelings that I want to stew in at the moment. For tradition's sake, we're going to do it. Sam, we usually start out the program by going through the box score, looking at the winners, the losers, the key contributors from both sides, what the troubling trends that we may have seen. What did we experience? So let's do that right now rather than reading the Mars ads. Let's go directly to the box score. The box score is really weighted heavily on one side. Let's look at the Orioles offensively. They got 3 hits from their leadoff hitter Manny Machado, a hit from Jimmy Paredes. Almost nothing until you get to J.J. Hardy, and that tells the offensive story for the Orioles in this game. 5 hits over the 9 innings, of course, and 2 RBIs to show from it. They struck out 5 times, which I guess you have to say is a good thing after the horror show that was the Pineda game in New York, right?
Hey, every cloud has a silver lining. The fact that we didn't strike out quite as many times as we did against Pineda, sure, that's a good thing. However, I would point to the fact that Pineda, while he may be a cheater, does have a live fastball and is still in the shank of his 20s. Mark Buehrle should not be capable of shutting us down in the way that he does. And I tweeted this during the game, and I'd like to say it again to anybody who's watching now. There should be a rule on the books that makes it so that you don't have to face Bartolo Colon and Mark Buehrle in successive weeks. That is too much junk ball for anyone to have to bear.
Well, I ask you, was the Pineda game simply that Pineda was that good, or was it the Orioles were that special and Pineda happened to be pitching that night?
Well, the Pineda thing is really interesting, and it sort of, I think, provides an interesting way of talking about what the Yankees have been able to do so far this season, which is Pineda, in the limited amounts of time when he's been able to successfully stay on a major league mound, whether it's because he's been hurt or because he has decided that the rules don't apply to him, has been a dominant pitcher. And that is the case with a lot of the guys on the Yankees roster. Whether for reasons of age or legal vagary, they have a really remarkable ability to shoot themselves in the foot. But I've been saying on our show since the beginning of this year, if the Yankees were ever able to get all their ducks in a row, that team would be just as terrifying as it's ever been. And I think we've seen that so far. And we're getting into a dangerous situation as we chug dangerously close to June, where they may have built up enough of a lead that there's not enough time for us to hope for their implosion.
Well, we're going too far down the line and talking about another house of horrors. We've got our own house of horrors here this evening to talk about. Let's bring it back real quickly.
I'm trying to forget about it.
That's not going to happen. Sorry, pal. You talked about Mark Buehrle. Mark Buehrle threw 6 innings. He gave up 2 earned runs. He walked 1 and he struck out 4, which was more than enough to shut down the Orioles, particularly because the Orioles were determined to beat themselves. On the other end, you got 6 2/3 innings from Chris Tillman, who was charged with 5 earned runs. He walked 1. He struck out 4. I think it was really a start of the tale of two Chris Tillmans, and we'll get to that a little bit later in the pitching segment. Tommy Hunter came in for a third of an inning. T.J. McFarland, again, a third of an inning, and Brad Brock was heroic in his 1.2 innings pitched. Brutal game. Let's go through it, and let's start, as we always do, with the highlights and lowlights. I'm going to start with you. Sam, what was your highlight for this game?
Well, you mentioned that it was a tale of two Chris Tillmans type of game, and I think that's very true. But a highlight that I would like to point out is that more so than in any start yet this season, Chris Tillman was locating his fastball, dotting it in the 92, 93 mile per hour range in the way that he does when we've seen him be successful. And more importantly than that, he was throwing that really nice down in the strike zone curveball that starts around the belt and ends up below the knees. When he's able to throw that for strikes or throw it just out of the zone on an 0-2 or 1-2 count, that's when he's the guy that we have talked about signing to a contract extension. And for the first time tonight, you saw him doing that with some consistency. And obviously, we need him to do that if he's going to be the anchor of our staff the way he has been for the last couple of years.
Sure. For me on this side, my highlight was Manny Machado's 2 doubles. Before he got hurt the first time, he was a doubles machine. Mm-hmm. And we all thought to ourselves, man, if he can just, put a little bit more oomph on that, he can be a home run hitter. But I miss doubles from Manny, and I'm hoping that this is a good thing, a bellwether of things to come. So that was my highlight for this game. What about you as far as lowlights are concerned? There may be one or two that we can pick through in this game.
Yeah, let me just rack my brain here and see if I can come up with anything negative that transpired. Look, this was a horrific baseball game to sit through. Not
if you're a Toronto fan.
That's true. Dan Duquette had a wonderful time, as we were joking about before we went on the air. I think, just to cherry pick something that I think is going to be discussed a lot in the next 36 hours, and which should be discussed a lot in the next 36 hours, but to take a possibly unpopular stance on it. Obviously, the throwing errors have been a big problem for Manny Machado this year, but already there's a huge chorus of people on Twitter saying that he's not capable of making routine plays and that he's mentally checked out and that basically, we ought to bench him. And I think I understand that sentiment, but I'd really like us to take a big step back and consider the fact that while the throwing errors and what seem to be some mental mistakes on his part are troubling, we need to look at the totality of what Manny is doing here this season. He's been asked to go from being sometime number 2 hitter, sometime number 5 hitter, to the leadoff hitter. He's been asked to step in for Nick Markakis, who is a legitimate franchise legend. I think from an offensive standpoint, he's done that admirably. And then I think, another thing that we need to consider here is Manny is playing for the first time with 2 surgically repaired knees. And it may be that the arm strength that we've seen from him in the past wasn't totally generated by his arm. He may be having trouble planting his feet quite as well, or shifting to his left and his right and having to hurry some throws because of the injuries to the knees. And that's why I think we're seeing some of them sail and skip. So while it is troubling, and while it was certainly a low light in this game, I don't think it's as simple as, Manny's head's not in the game.
I feel cheated, Sam. And the reason is because I was told we had the technology and we could build him stronger. And, if that's not the case, I feel like we've been done a great disservice.
Yes. I'm sorry to tell you that cyborg baseball is still, I think, 2 to 3 years away, unfortunately.
I'll keep waiting. My low light for this game was pretty depressing. The thing is as soon as that third run of the ball game crossed the plate, I knew that the game was over. And it's really unfortunate when you can start predicting how things are going to end. And the way things are going this season is when they're not going well, you know it's over. You knew that the Orioles were going to pack up the bats, and that was going to be it. I didn't expect that it would turn into the laugher that it turned into. I thought that 3 or 4 runs would be enough for the Toronto Blue Jays to coast while the Orioles did their best to put themselves out quickly as possible. But that's a low light. I think that was the worst part of the dark period. Was you knew how games were going to end. You knew exactly how the Orioles were going to get themselves out. And it's troubling that they're not able to put themselves in better position to win. And I'm not saying that because this is one bad game. I'm saying because through the last week and a half or so of Orioles baseball, you're seeing a lot of the same things happen over and over again. It would be a lot easier if something like this happened and you had to think back to the last game that the Orioles won, and it didn't take you a few seconds to do it. But sure. Hey, let's talk about the offense. There has to be something to talk about. Sam, what do you have from the offensive side of the ball?
Well, I think obviously Jimmy Paredes is great to talk about, and he's clearly doing pretty well. I guess the thing that I would like to address here is we've batted Delman Young cleanup for the last few games. And
on purpose, no less.
On purpose. It's not like, he's going in and rearranging the lineup card of his own will and volition. I don't know if everybody else has noticed, but Delman Young has hit 0 home runs so far in 2015, and his slugging percentage is not particularly high either. And I guess it's a little bit – and he also, I know RBIs are a somewhat outmoded stat in this day and age, but those aren't really there either. He's actually really been hitting much more like Nick Markakis in 2015 than like the Nelson Cruz that he's being asked to perform as. So it's a little puzzling to me that we're continuing to give him those high leverage at-bats on such a regular basis, particularly against right-handed pitching. And in that same vein, one of the other things that I think has been a troubling storyline in the early going is while Travis Snider hasn't been an offensive zero and certainly hasn't been a defensive zero, 1 home run so far on the year. We're a month and a half in, and a huge part of the appeal of Travis Snider was the fact that he also was supposed to make up for some of the power that departed with Nelson Cruz, and that wasn't there towards the end with Nick Markakis. So I'm not sure where either of those guys' power strokes have gone, but we're going to need them.
Well, I love as much as anybody to hate on Delman Young. It is one of my favorite pastimes. But let me ask you this, not tongue-in-cheek and not joking at all, who else would you put at cleanup other than Adam Jones right now? During the Sundays, I'm shocked that I'm not seeing the Sunday lineup, and I think it's because our Sunday lineup is basically an everyday thing. And, with the exception of Adam Jones, who for the longest time was absolutely on fire, and maybe Jimmy Paredes, who's, again, been really great, I don't think you have a lot of dependable options there to construct your lineup. So is Delman Young's batting cleanup a desperation move? Sure, but unfortunately, I don't think there are a ton of better options right now.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think what's really going on is that Buck Showalter's having to look at his bench every night and think to himself, who do I have that's capable of putting the ball in play at all? Mm-hmm. And really, the answer to that question is a pretty short list. It's Manny Machado, it's Jimmy Paredes, it's Adam Jones, and that's about it.
Now, hold the phone just a minute. You're not being fair. Buck Showalter also has Ryan Lavarnway to put out there against Andrew Miller with the game on the line.
Criminally wasting away in anonymity, Ryan Lavarnway, the potential savior of the 2015 squad. I don't know why this card isn't being played more forcefully.
And here we are again, wandering back into the Bronx. Apparently that series was difficult to swallow. Can I we talked about the tale of 2 Chris Tillmans here, but I want to do the same thing with Jimmy Paredes. Jimmy Paredes has just been on fire. He's been, incredibly hot. And the crazy thing about it was, again, I hate to do it, I'm going to talk about the New York series. He had a game where he went 3 for 5 and he saw 8 pitches. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So not only is he scoring runs, not only is he driving those runs in, but he's also being incredibly aggressive. And I feel like that aggressiveness backfired in the bottom of the 6th inning tonight when Jimmy Paredes wouldn't see enough pitches to get himself into a hitter's count and to find something he could do with.
Absolutely. It happened again. Obviously, the game was pretty well out of reach at that point in the
Really?
eighth inning. I don't know. Jimmy Paredes, as amazing as he has been, still has not found that 8-run home run stroke. And step it up here, Jimmy. We need you more than we ever have needed anyone, apparently. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think one of the things that we saw tonight, on top of all the other terribleness, is we started to see what the potential limitations to relying too heavily on Jimmy Paredes are. He is apparently at some times a good hitter, but he's certainly not a complete hitter of the kind that we're going to need to dig our way out of this hole, and that we're going to need consistently in the 2-hole, which he's currently occupying.
Gotcha. We could talk all day and night long about the offensive production that we got out of the Blue Jays, but is there anything else on the Orioles worth talking about tonight?
Well, one thing I would love to bring up, assuming we're okay shifting over to defense here, is Caleb Joseph has done yeoman's work so far this season. One might call his workload Wiedersian. As we mentioned earlier, Ryan LaVarnway is occasionally, I think, allowed to sniff the baseball before certain weeknight games.
But only the batting practice balls. He's not allowed near the real balls.
No. And to be fair, lest anyone get the wrong idea, I don't want Ryan LaVarnway behind the plate in a major league game for my baseball team. It's not something I'm interested in. However, Caleb Joseph's offensive production has obviously been not just a revelation, but something we've depended on at various points. I do think, though, that we're starting, as the team is not as able to win close games. Again, not that tonight was a close game. We're starting to see the situations where we really miss Wieters the most. We're seeing a lot of pitchers, and this is just anecdotal, but I would encourage folks to watch for this over the next few games and see if you agree. We're seeing a lot of pitchers shake Caleb Joseph off, which I think possibly rattles him a little bit, and invariably the outcome of those at-bats is not good. We're starting to see Caleb Joseph jog out to the mound a little bit out of desperation, which is something that Matt Wieters has learned to do on a regular basis and really show a knack for settling pitchers down. And tonight we saw, as we've seen a couple of times now, Caleb Joseph get crossed up by his pitcher. Tommy Hunter crossed up Caleb Joseph before he served up the second home run to Edwin Encarnacion. I think it's interesting to me to note that for all of last year, even though Wieters was not playing, he was in the dugout. He had the surgery and he just wanted to be around the team. So he was able to be there as a resource for Caleb Joseph on a regular and consistent basis, and perhaps even stand in for him a little bit with some of the pitchers who weren't ready to trust him yet. That's not there this time around, and I wonder if we're starting to see the effects of Wieters' absence as much as we're starting to feel the effects of Caleb Joseph's regular presence.
Well, I'm not sure I can fully co-sign the fact that Caleb Joseph is costing the team ball games, which is an extreme way of interpreting what you just said. Sure. But I will wholly co-sign and say that he is not Matt Wieters. Mm-hmm. And I will say that once Matt Wieters returns, they say it's June 4th, so probably September. But when Matt Wieters returns, it will be an excellent tandem, the both of them. And I think when Caleb Joseph is used as he is intended, which is a part-time major league player, he will be a real asset to this team. And I will agree that it's probably too much for him right now.
Absolutely. And I think, one of the things we saw last year is Wieters take very well to the DH role during that brief period where it wasn't clear whether he was going to be able to continue to catch, but could still felt okay enough to hit. And so if what we end up seeing is Wieters filling the DH role on days when he's not expected to catch, which allows Jimmy Paredes to slip into more of a part-time role for which he's better suited, that can only be good for this offense.
Yeah. Let's talk defense. You talked earlier a little bit about Travis Snider. Travis Snider, I have conflicting feelings about because one, I think maybe he's not quite the end of the world, and on the other hand, I think maybe we should push him out on an ice floe and never think about him again. I'm reminded of him having that ball bounce off his glove in right field at Camden Yards. Was it opening day? That cost 3 runs and a truly awful beatdown of the Orioles by the Toronto Blue Jays. But Travis Snider did us a solid tonight with a great defensive play to end a threat there in the outfield. So I'm not sure if this is a blind squirrel finds a nut situation, or if it's the fact that Travis Snider is one of those guys that Dan Duquette finds who, can wow you every once in a while and play dependable defense the rest of the time.
Well, I mean, I think, it certainly seems like, as you say, I would not be willing to co-sign the idea, and this is an extreme version of what you've just insinuated. I would not be willing to say that Travis Snider's defense has cost us any games in the outfield. I think it's fair to say that he is not, on balance, quite as good as De Aza in left field, probably not quite as good as David Lowe. But I certainly don't think he's enough of a step back that you'd prefer to have either De Aza or Lowe's bat in the lineup. I think of him as actually a pretty similar defender to Delman Young, where he's going to get to most of the balls that he should. He's got a stronger arm than you expect him to, and it's not going to be pretty, but it's also not going to be Michael Morse. And, I think more the larger issue is, and this goes back to, and again, I feel like I'm getting sort of meta with a lot of the issues that we're discussing tonight, but tonight feels fairly apocalyptic and we need big solutions. So
this team just lost a ball game 8-2. I think you can say whatever you want to on the post-game show, because anybody that's watching the post-game show after that ball game is signed up for whatever. No is not in their vocabulary.
That's true. Anyone who's here is enjoying the filleting that we are offering. So when you look at the offseason, and so early in this broadcast, we insinuated the idea that Dan Duquette is secretly happy to be watching the Blue Jays treat the Orioles like a whipping child. And I think what the Travis Snider conversation sort of points at is the opportunities that existed this offseason to make some pretty low risk, high upside offensive and defensive acquisitions. And to be very specific there, I'm referring to Jason Hayward, who was acquired by the Cardinals from the Braves for a very similar package to something that we could have offered, and Billy Butler, who signed with the Athletics for 3 years and $10 million a year. I think both of those guys are people who would have had a very stabilizing presence for us, and deals like those deals were not made, and we were stuck with the Travis Sniders, Wesley Wrights, Delman Youngs, and Everett Cabreras of the world, because Dan Duquette, I think it's not an exaggeration to say, had one foot out the door. And I think what you're seeing as we start to get into the dog days of this season are the wages of that reality.
Well, it's interesting because the team is constructed in such a way, and I think we'll have a conversation about this in just a little bit, about the way the team's constructed and how it builds to what we're seeing. But this team has been one where I think the depth has been so good over the last 3 years, and you've gotten a lot of productive performances from guys that are on that fringe. The 40-man roster is something that Dan Duquette's done a really great job of building, and Buck Showalter's done a really good job of using. One of the things defensively that I wanted to talk about is I want to make sure it doesn't get lost that Steve Pearce played another credible game at second base today. And Steve Pearce has every bit a right to be a second baseman in the major leagues as you or I do. And it's, last night was incredible. He gets moved from left field. He's an outfielder by trade, or first baseman. He gets pulled from a position where he's experienced and capable. He moves to second base, and the very next play, the ball gets hit to him. Yep. We're in a situation right now where, with an injury to Ryan Flaherty, with limited roster flexibility, with the defensive pariah that is Jimmy Paredes, we are getting by right now because Steve Pearce can play a credible major league second base after having never done it before at the major league level. So, he didn't make any stellar, sparkling plays tonight, but in a game where defensive miscues by Platinum Glove winning players, took place. I don't want to lose the fact that Steve Pearce is playing second base at a passable level at a time when the team desperately needs it.
And all I would like to add to that is, God bless him, he's even found a way to hit like Ryan Flaherty.
It's a weird season. It's a weird season because Jimmy Paredes has turned into Steve Pearce, right?
Yep.
Steve Pearce has turned into Ryan Flaherty, as you so well put. Ubaldo Jimenez has turned into Ubaldo Jimenez. It's incredible, is it not?
It is. Bud Norris has turned into Ubaldo Jimenez. I would say.
He has. And that's the last laugh I can have, and the rest of it is tears. The rest of it is tears. All right. We've been studiously avoiding it, but I think we have to do it. Let's go into the pitching realm. Chris Tillman. It was the tale of two Tillmans. Early on, I was phenomenal, and I want to make sure we talk about it because obviously this game was terrible. But Chris Tillman has had a problem in the first inning or the first two innings before, and he was not just good. He was incredible at the beginning of that game. I mean, I think it was, a 9-pitch first inning and then a 8-pitch inning, or, it was incredible.
Very efficient.
He got right through those first two innings, and that's been the bugaboo for him for a long time. So there was a period in this game, though it was short-lived, where he was in command and in control, and it looked like it was going to be a 3-2 pitcher's duel, but 'twas not to be.
'Twas not to be. I think it's such an interesting thing with Chris Tillman because it's always riding that razor's edge between feast and famine. And I think that was on display tonight, even before things got out of hand. We referenced the Travis Snider catch in left field earlier. That's one of those situations where that play gets made, and it looks like Chris Tillman is pitching much better than he actually did. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the conversation, again, over the next 36 hours is going to be around, how much damage Manny Machado's throwing error did to Chris Tillman's line, when Chris Tillman very nearly did that damage himself by serving up a 3-run home run to Jose Bautista in that situation. Another thing that I would like to bring up a little bit is, I watched the replay of Machado's throw to Tillman at first base just as many times as everybody else did, as Masson played it over and over again. And while I will grant you that it was not a good throw by Manny Machado, it was not a terrible throw. And I think it points at something larger that might be going on with Tillman, and this feels a little bit mean-spirited and unquantifiable, but I can't get over this sense when I watch him this year, when he works out of the stretch, that he has this punch that hasn't been there in the past. And when we look at the fact that he hasn't been able to finish his pitches quite as well, at least until the early going tonight, and we look at the fact that he hasn't been fielding his position very well, and that his velocity's been a little bit inconsistent, and more concretely at the fact that in one of the earliest reports out of the Orioles offseason this year, I believe it was in December or something like that, was a very controversial photograph that went around that made it seem like Chris Tillman had put on some weight. I wonder if that's not a storyline that needs a little bit more attention here in the early going. He's been giving up a lot of home runs, partially because he's been leaving the ball up, perhaps because he, can't get his right elbow down as quickly because he's busy negotiating his belly. Again, not trying to body shame anybody here, but it does seem like his finesse and his instincts and his reflexes are not quite as good this year. And when you're dealing with somebody who rides that razor's edge the way that he does, that can be a huge difference maker.
I feel at this point that I need to defend Chris Tillman. And I feel this very strongly because
weird high school personal attack that I just
as a diehard Orioles fan who spent 14 years defending a team that was indefensible, I feel like I have to defend Chris Tillman, and this is how I'm going to go about it. And I think that I'm going to get style points for it.
Okay.
Chris Tillman is merely trying what has proven to be effective with Bartolo Colon. It's a winning strategy elsewhere, and my God, it should work here in Baltimore as well. I do have a question for you. I listened to the game on the radio for most of it, so I depended on my ears, and by that I mean I depended on the recollections of Fred Manfra as he described the play that took place 20 minutes ago. But with Chris Tillman, one thing that I've noticed with my eyes at the ballpark and also watching the game on Masson is that when he misses, it seems like the ball is in the other batter's box. You know, he either it's either on the plate or it is way off the plate.
Sure.
Was he close with his misses tonight, or was it on and off the way he's done earlier in the season?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting point that you raise, because he did hit 2 batters tonight. They were his first 2 hit batsmen of the year, but they both were fairly, I won't say egregious because they didn't seem to be intentional, but both pitches missed their targets by a good 6 feet. And in particular, the pitch on which he hit Ezekiel Carrera was so far inside that Carrera couldn't really do anything to get out of the way of it, and it hit him almost squarely in the belly button. And the other one was up and in against Russell Martin, I believe. And Russell Martin has a little bit of a habit of diving out over the plate, so perhaps not as egregious there. But he definitely did seem to be falling victim to some of what you've described, which is why I think early in the game it was so notable that he was able to spot the fastball as well as he was and locate the curveball in the way that he was.
Here's the thing. If Chris Tillman is going to hit anybody on this lineup, it needed to have been Bautista.
I think that would have been so entertaining to see. I mean, he probably would have charged the mound, and that wouldn't have been great. But
there was going to be no game to watch. At least let there have been something entertaining, right?
Well, I was very proud of the few Orioles fans that were in attendance when Donaldson struck out and tossed his bat into the stands. He got an absolute thunder shower of boos, with the subtext of which was clearly, "Oh, who's a bat thrower now, Donaldson?" So I was, as usual, very proud of Orioles fans for having nice long memories.
Well, we have danced our way around a truly terrible game. The Orioles lost 8-2 in a game that didn't feel that close at the end. So let's bring this to a close. At the end of this, we usually try to provide our bottom line takeaway. And I'm going to go first only because I think that I am closer to having an outburst than you are. And I'm going to say that my bottom line takeaway for this game is the Orioles better figure things out in a hurry. Because if one or more of the things that are going wrong were happening individually, it wouldn't be as troublesome, but it's all happening at the same time. No defense, not a problem. We've got all that off. No, offense isn't clicking. Okay, not a problem. We've got all that starting pitching. No, okay, the starters are a god-awful mess. Okay, well, the bullpen at least is going to be no, everything has gone wrong at the same time. And it seems like the Orioles, it's just that they're not firing on any individual cylinders. And every time a game like this happens, all I can think is that the folks that make the Pagoda predictions that must be laughing themselves to sleep after watching the box score of the Orioles come across. So my bottom line takeaway is it's not over, but the Orioles have got to figure it out because they are spiraling right now. And as early as it might be, it's suddenly going to not be early. And we're going to find ourselves with another lost season.
Well, I'm reminded of that phrase that we used to hear so often during Rocky Coppinger starts and during Chris Benson starts back during the dark period that you referenced earlier, where the broadcasters would say it's getting late early. And, you know, I'm going to take a slightly different tack here and say that I agree with you that all is not lost yet. But I would like us to keep in mind that we do have a number of dogs that haven't barked yet in this season. Among them, the Wieters factor, which we discussed at some length earlier in tonight's broadcast. J.J. Hardy has only just rejoined the lineup on a regular basis. He's still getting his feet under him. He's still finding his timing. I think he's going to stabilize the defense in a productive way. Jonathan Scope should be back before too long and will be able to provide some more consistent defense at second base. And let's not forget that he was hitting with a lot more authority when he went down. I think, we're also clearly reaching, and, reading the tea leaves, it seems pretty likely that we're cruising in this direction where Showalter and Duquette are starting to realize that they would have to find a way to get Gausman into the rotation. When Gausman does go out on his rehab assignment after his current injury, which we found out today is not that serious, he is going to be worked out and stretched out as a starter at AAA, which seems to suggest that they're looking for ways to get him into the rotation. Bundy has been pitching very well at AA so far this year. And as we know, now that it's not the offseason anymore and he doesn't have his feet out the door, if Dan Duquette sees a deal that he can make to improve the team, he's going to make it. And we certainly do have some surplus of starting pitching to deal from. So I think all of those things have to be considered important. And then the other factor I just want to point out here is that last year, as Jim Palmer was making on saying on the broadcast last night, this was a 500 team going into June. The same thing was true in 2013 and in 2012. The way the Orioles have operated during their recent run of relevance is to keep things close up until the All-Star break and then find ways of pulling away over the course of the second half. Now, the difference here is that the Yankees, as we discussed earlier, are firing on all cylinders. And if we let them do that for too long, they were really going to be dependent on them having injuries, which they may not have. We've been fortunate in that the Red Sox have underperformed, I would say, far worse than we have. We're fortunate that the Jays, while they really did a number on us tonight, clearly don't have the pitching to really pull away from the rest of the pack. And I think, truthfully, don't have the managerial acumen to pull away from the rest of the pack. The Rays, I think, have benefited mostly from the screw-ups of us, Boston, and Toronto in the early going, and probably do not have the ability to sustain this. But if the Yankees continue to play the way they have, and if the Yankees make a couple of key acquisitions at the deadline, if the Yankees are the team that lands Cole Hamels, none of it's going to matter.
Well, on that rosy note, let's do a quick reset for tomorrow. We'll get another game here at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. It's nice to see the Birds home, to see these games in person, especially tonight. Miguel Gonzalez will start for the Orioles. Aaron Sanchez for the Jays, who we have seen in the past, and hopefully the Orioles will be able to solve that particular riddle tomorrow. Again, Orioles lose 8-2, but hey, all is not lost. This series is certainly still winnable. And it's hopeful that the Orioles can start tomorrow and try to turn something positive going on for this particular season. Before we wrap up, Sam Dingman, I am going to ask, because I don't care if anybody else is interested. I want to know what's going on with Baltimoreans in general and this week.
Well, we had a really great couple of episodes recently. We released our annual nickname audit, which was a really good time. A lot of those nicknames had some negative connotations, and those were very helpful to me in the privacy of my own home with a glass of red wine this evening, as I hope they would be to all of you. We also had an episode that we were very excited about with Travis Waldron from Think Progress, talking about the unrest that has gone on in Baltimore of late. And this week, we're very excited. We're going to be joined by Craig Calcaterra from NBC Sports, who's somebody whose writing we've admired for a long time, and we're very excited to have him on. So we'll be recording that on Thursday night, and that'll be up on Friday.
Fantastic. Over here at Bird's Eye View, we just released an episode which was partially live from Nobles, where we took in some of the festivities from reopening day. A great story there of an Australian Orioles fan who wanted to participate in reopening day and in raising some spirits in Baltimore. Make sure you check that out. Also, it's our annual Mother's Day episode, so you will hear the ladies behind the mic for one of the segments, and that was always an entertaining bit. So that'll do it here for BSR Postgame Live. Again, Sam Dingman of the amazing Baltimoreans podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm Jake English from Bird's Eye View. We'll be back. We're off on Thursday, so we'll be back on Tuesday. Birds lose 8-2. Hang in there. It has to get better. Good night.
Take it easy, folks.